All right, we're here. We did it. Welcome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all three for being here. I so appreciate the gift of your time and also the gift of your talents and sharing your perspectives with the world. I think that's so, so rich and valuable. So I'm excited here to sort of unpack the type one today, which has a very special place in my heart for lots of reasons. One, because it's for me as a type seven, the grounding in the one is what has sort of given me some relief and some solace from all of the sort of lightness of the seven that can sort of lead to some shallow, unpredictable behaviors. And so I look to the one in others and I look to the one in myself for this sort of beautiful constancy that is not always easily accessible to me. So it feels really good to be in your company because I feel like I'm sort of going to leech all this goodness from you. So if you would take a minute to introduce yourselves, type any other relevant details before we start diving into your perspectives of the one.
Okay, well, my name is Cindy. I am a type 1 wing 2 with a relational instinct, but I kind of do the social too.
Yeah.
I'm a newbie at this, so forgive my naivety, but yeah, I'm that's one reason I'm doing this panel is just to learn more.
Yeah.
So I'm a director of a home health and hospice agency in Northern California.
Thanks, Cindy.
My name is Anna. I am a type 1 self-preservation instinct, which rings loud and true. And then a wing 2. I was in Aaron's Enneagram group, so kind of just out of that, love to continue chatting about the work. And I work in data analytics, so do all the problem solving and all the deep thinking there. So.
And my name is Allison. I'm a social 1, wing 2, and I work for a nonprofit. My role is there as a development coordinator. So working behind the scenes, helping them improve all of the things that we're doing around the globe.
Nice. Well, thank you all three for being here. When we sort of think about type, we tend to sort of put it in a bucket, right? And we think that all ones sort of, or any type, act this certain way. And so I'm really excited for each of your perspectives to, I think, blow some more room and nuance and sort of this beautiful depth into type to see how we use it and how we move through that. So if you wouldn't mind, anyone who wants to share how you came to know your type and kind of how it sat with you, or what the reflections or lessons you had in that process.
Yeah, I can go. So I first heard about the Enneagram, I think how a lot of people did, just social media and sort of popular culture. And my first instinct was like, oh no, not another personality thing that's going to tell me I'm like intense. I really don't want to hear that again. So I didn't really get into it till a couple of years later, as I was trying to figure out, I became a new mom and was trying to figure out, how do I start to understand myself again? And what I enjoyed when Aaron and I did the typing interview about the Enneagram was the hope in growth and the ability to evolve and morph. I think in a lot of other sort of personality type conversations, that can be really hard. You're boxed in, that's what you are, and there's sort of no movement. The Enneagram really provided a lot more movement for me. And as a self-preservation type 1, it is still a very intense type, but it really gave me more language for understanding when I'm at my best, what are the other things I can reach for and really represent. And when I'm sort of overtaken, how can I get out of that and reach for something else? So
Sure.
that's how that's at. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
I can go next. I have been familiar with it for years and had done the self-test online and what identified with the 2. So I thought I was a 2 wing 1. And then a friend of mine gifted me a typing interview to do with Aaron. And I'm going to choke up because through that interview, I felt like Aaron really got to my motivations and understood me better than anybody else had ever understood me, and helped me to understand myself, that actually I'm a 1 wing 2. And I've been sitting with it for the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, and it is for sure true. It's helped me to understand why I do what I do, why I work in the nonprofit global world that I work in, because of the motivation. So it's been an interesting experience, and I'm so excited to be here today because I am really new to this too, and excited to learn more.
Well, thank you for that, Allison. You show up so beautifully and so clearly and so candidly that it made my sort of human algorithm work easy. So you need to take a lot of credit for that.
Thanks.
Well, I've heard about this off and on for years, and for a while I thought kind of, it's kind of, I'm sorry, but I have a daughter who was persuaded me to pursue it and introduced me to Erin. And so I thought, well, what the heck, so I had the interview, and I really liked it because from what Anna said, it gives potential for growth. So I don't have to be stuck as the bitch. I can actually, and there's a reason for that, but I can use that and grow. And so that's my motivation, is to I like lifelong learning, but first just to grow and to become a better 1 wing 2.
Yeah. Well, and I think that sort of lends really nicely into sort of the framework of the 1. And when you lay the 1 in, like, inside sort of the typical corporate culture in America, right? It sort of like perpetuates your patterns, because we value in our culture perfectionism. We value high standards. We value sort of numeric achievement, right? Like, basically, like, all through school, even in college, we're sort of oriented to a grade point average and how well I do in a class and how much I perform. So these sort of tendencies around drive to be really good, right? To sort of be this hardworking, I think the 1 sort of gets labeled as the perfectionist, and I think maybe reformer is a more accurate term, like this sort of hustle for goodness and always improving. And so culture sort of helps you sort of over embody those traits, oftentimes to sort of the detriment of self. And so I think it's hard to sort of pull back from that and go, is this the only way to be, when the rest of the world is like rewarding me for being this way, right? So there's a duality, and I think that's true for the type 3 too, sort of the high performers. So you guys have work to do in sort of breaking up with this as a single source pattern for yourself, and sort of in the context of the work we do in the world. So that's hard work, right? Whew. And so for me, the beauty in the 1 is sort of breathing some grace into that, learning to sort of create this safety net underneath of, like, how do I allow myself to make mistakes? How do I sort of give myself a little more graciousness, a little more grace, have some self-compassion? Those are all sort of learned things. When I have to do that because my sort of personality says it, and then society enforces it. So I think just starting off, giving yourself some credit and some kudos for how hard it is to break or reinforce new behavioral patterns when you're up against this dual stacking. So
yeah, I think even Erin, as you're even talking about giving kudos, my brain is like, what are you saying? I don't understand kudos. Because it is one of those things where for especially a self-pres 1, as you're sitting in like achievement is the baseline, any like reaching it just doesn't even feel like positive. So I think that's been a lot of my big work in giving the grace so that I can actually even feel what achieving is. It's been really wild.
Totally. So I like the framework of reformer over perfectionism, because not every type values perfectionism the way we understand it to be true, right? But this reforming quality, this like hustle towards goodness out of this desire to get ahead of criticism. I'm going to work really, really hard to be really good, to be really ethical, to have high standards of self, so that I can avoid the criticism that might come from others, because I've already done the work. I've already found the mistake. I've already corrected the mistake. So you don't need to tell me anything because I've already done it, right? Like this real, drive forward. And the self-preservation, social, and relational ones all take reforming to a nuanced level, where the self-preservation one sort of takes the reforming inward and sort of pushes self, high standard, high, requirements of perfectionism. That is maybe where we might hit perfectionism more clearly. This is the way you do things. This is how it's supposed to look. And I need to sort of march to that for certainty and clarity. Where the social one takes reforming out into the community and says, like, what is social order asking of me? Right? And how do I sort of live into that sort of social order, and what's good for everybody? And also, like, why doesn't everybody just do these things and we'll all be okay? Like the sort of requirements of community, where the relational one can sort of take that clarity and sort of put some heat behind it. And that's maybe where the directness comes from, Cindy, where people might be like, wow, she feels kind of bitchy, when in reality it's like, you're just really clear and direct. And you can
I like that better.
I can get to sort of the heart of the matter really, really clearly, when there are other types that orient to other, that sort of take their authority outside of themselves. And that can feel really intense because they sort of lack the capacity to know it in that sort of succinct way, right? So there's some heat directed behind that, and the relational type one can sort of put that out clearly in the world and can kind of see that really clearly. I had a boss in my last job who was a relational type one, and she was the greatest gift to my work I could ever have asked for, because she pointed out all of my holes. And running, corporate communications, I needed someone to poke holes, right? Like, and so where that energy might have been hard for others, for me, it was the thing that kept my ship afloat, because she was able to sort of find the things that maybe other people were not equipped to give me the feedback in, or who weren't seeing. So we've got the self-pres who takes it to self, high standards, social, who kind of puts that equally out in the world. This is what social order. And then the relational, who can kind of direct that clarity outward. And the truth is, we have all of these instincts, right? Whether or not you orient to a dominant, you still have access to these other ways of orienting the one. It just takes work, right? While I sort of value the social order of things too as a 7, my work is to really bring in the relational and self-preservation instincts to give me a little more balance and some new tools in my toolbox. So how does the sort of container of one, and the reforming quality, and the sort of high standards of self, the sort of hustling in front of criticism, and the instinctual patterns, what shows up for you, or what rings true for you? It's a big loaded question.
Yeah.
So your question is, how does it show up?
Yeah, or what resonates or what doesn't, just any musings or reflections.
Well, for me, it's like, oh, that's why I am how I am. That's why I think this, or, I mean, I'm the type of person that if I leave the grocery store and forgot that there's a pack of gum at the bottom of the cart, I'll go back in and pay for it, because I don't want to live with the knowledge that I took the gum So people think I'm strange, but no, I'm a 1.
Yeah, it's just helping to put it all together.
I think what resonated for me was the process of feedback and sort of the vulnerability required to receive feedback from others. I think feels really hard when you're in the cycle of self-criticism and self-preservation. So that's one that I just switched jobs recently, and I'm in a pretty high feedback culture now, which has been a really curious experience for me in terms of how do I allow feedback to be a positive part of a work experience. Has been really interesting. So I'm glad I did this work before diving into that change.
Yeah, totally. Feedback can feel like an affront when my sort of sense of self and my security is related to how good I am, right? And so that can be sort of this hard space for a 1 to believe in my inherent goodness, right? Like I am just good already, regardless of how well I execute XYZ. And that feedback is just a part of helping me to improve skill, not self, right? And but yet, because this sort of ties together so beautifully with culture that says the better you are, right? In terms of like output on paper, the more good I am. So it's sort of learning to separate that, which is really hard to do when the whole orientation is to reaffirm that.
Yeah, I would say that that's where I've been sitting is figuring out how I've sat and I've taken on the good girl role my whole life. And part of that's inherently who I am, right? Like I strive to be the good girl, and I guess I'm just trying to now kind of find that growth. And this has been so helpful for me to, during our typing interview, and this might be a tangent, sorry, but that when you were able to name for me the inner critic, because I didn't realize not everybody has such a loud inner critic as I do. And so the last few months, just my awareness around that and then what to do when that inner critic is taking over has helped me find some growth. And it's that grace that you were talking about at the beginning of this call, which has been so helpful, because until then, it was on full force and I didn't know where it had come from or why it was going so strong and why it was so loud. And now I'm learning how to quiet it. And even in the Enneagram yoga thing or thing that you're doing on Instagram right now, and the day you had the one just hold our head was so powerful for me, because it was like, oh, I had somebody else to help hold that. It wasn't somebody else, it was my own hand, right? But somebody to help hold all of that stuff, all of those thoughts. And I am for sure not a perfectionism in my outward life, but it's that inner perfectionism. I'm constantly trying to be. So people would walk in my house. I could move the camera right now and you would see the disasters. I'm not the type A. And I think that's why I thought I wasn't a 1, because of the word perfectionism was attached to it. And some other friends of mine that are 1s whose houses are perfectly in order. And that's so not me. But it was once again getting to that reformation part and that motivation of what, then I'm like, oh, and then it's the inner critic perfectionism that's so loud for me. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
totally. So how does your sort of patterns, the way in which you sort of find safety and security in the world, whether you call that perfectionism or reforming or the inner critic or having high values, high morals, high ethics, how does that show up for you at home or at work or both?
I'll go because it's fresh in my head. I was thinking about this and what I'm learning. And Cindy, I so appreciated you said like the bitch. I'm learning that it shows up as, and I tend to feel like I know it all, but I'm probably not always right. So I'm learning to go, okay, my way isn't always the right way, but I think it is often. And I think I have that perspective or that intuition. I don't know if that's part of the one, but like, oh, I can see the problems that need to be fixed, or people's problems or their internal struggles, and I want to step in. I'm not a therapist, but I'm like, oh, but if you just did these things, like you could find freedom. So I'm learning how to maybe soften it so that I'm not the bitch.
Yeah, and you're right. That is that internal sort of instinct is why ones sit in the body type, right? And I remember this was something that Anna and I experienced in the group, because she's like, I'm so head heavy, right? I think so much. And so I was thinking I was a head type, but it's really sort of that internal measure, right? Like I think about ones having like this ruler on the inside of them that I can sort of measure everything up against, right? And I know what's right. And so that's where you get sort of the strength of body, the strength of knowing, right? Knowing where it comes from. Yet I can sort of I stimulate processes as a way to create that sort of right way of being. So I can understand where there's some of that duality.
Yeah, and I don't think it was until you helped me identify as a one that I understood. Also, I was raised in a culture that I was taught not to trust myself. So since I had this interview and I've tapped into that inner knowing or that gut that I can trust, I'm in a process with my therapist of really digging in and learning to trust, because I have it, but I was taught for so long it was not trustworthy. So really it's been like revolutionary for me.
And I think that's for the social type, where we can sort of dilute, is this the social order, right? The social instinct of valuing belonging over the motivation of the one that's valuing what's right, right? And so that's where instinct on top of behavioral patterns gives us more clarity. When we just talk about the type one and we just sort of bucket behavior of, oh, they're sort of perfectionistic or hardworking or ethical, but we don't sort of look at social, relational, or self-pres, we miss all of the nuance that also creates pattern. And so there is a real trend to mistype social dominant folks as a 2, because social dominant means that I find my security in a herd, right? Like in a community. And when that's sort of rattled, I learn skills that get me back in community, like people pleasing, like sourcing for belonging, like, fawning or self-forgetting or some of those things. So it can be hard behaviorally to find where I fit if I don't also look at these instincts, which is why I think it's really important to have the 3 of your perspectives represented, because people can go, oh, that's what it looks like to be a social one, and sort of dance in the middle of both of those things. So
I think to your question, oh, thank you, Cindy. I think I think the question you posed, one thing that's been swimming in my brain is that I can be on a path and be doing so well and sort of not even check in on whether or not that's the path I want to be on, which is like I can do it for years. Not that I've done that many years quite yet, but and it's been more interesting to reflect now on sort of some good things that have come from doing that, as life kind of tends to shower those in various seasons, but then also some sense, like a loss of that gut feeling that Allison described, and the sort of loss of communication with it. That's what's been resonating in my brain with this part of the conversation. And it's the coming back, allowing sort of, when you question and criticize yourself so much to achieve perfection, it's like also somewhat hard to allow relaxing questions for exploration. And that's where I've kind of started to practice the muscle of, we're asking this question just to think. We're not solving, we're not arriving at achievement. Like, we're just being curious, and allowing that to be okay has been an interesting process.
Beautiful.
I was going to say, in my job, though, I have to be right.
Yes, you do.
So, excuse me. So it's hard to come home and not, so to separate. So that's what I've been learning, and it's kind of shutting my mouth and listening and realizing that I may not have the only right perspective. We could maybe both be right, or, or the big W word, I might be wrong, so. But it's hard sometimes to shut it off, because again, in my job, I do education and teaching, and I know more than most people in that field. So it's just interesting to learn to be able to pull back and give other people room to, possibly be right.
Yeah. When you said I have to be right, as I'm sort of in data work, when I'm presenting numbers and saying like, you need to do this based off of this information. If there's anything wrong supporting that, that's a problem. So it's, I've had to, I spoke so loud, Cindy. Thanks for sharing that, because so we end up in professions that sort of perpetuate
right
what we're trying to grow in.
Yeah, totally. I see that a lot. Like, my husband works in counterterrorism, and he's a 6, and he's a questioner, and he asks a lot of, information, and he's a really good investigator, and it serves his work really well. And then he comes home and he's sort of interrogating me or the kids, and I'm like, and it's a lot to sort of turn that off when it's required, not only for survival, but I get rewarded for it, right? Like, I'm really good at these things, and then I come home and it doesn't necessarily serve, in my other roles as well, right? So how would you encourage people in your life, family, friends, coworkers, to allow you to sort of release some of that control, or make room for sort of other ways of thinking or being? What would help you access that?
Well, I would make them.
Just gonna
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Cindy.
I would make them aware that I'm trying this, that I'm asking for less control, because most of the people, at least my family, they know me as high control. So, unless I were to verbalize it, they wouldn't. I don't think they'd understand.
So give them a framework to start with.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I was gonna say that just that thought makes me go, I don't even know. I'm so used to it. But thank you, Cindy, for saying that, because it made me think of everyone. I have 5 children from the ages of 23 to 13, and a husband, and I've trained everybody that I just do everything.
Right.
So I think that and it's easy, and I like to do it because I'm good at it, and I've done it because it's easier for me to just do it and do it right than to let them do it or teach them how to do it right. So I've had to learn, because resentment started to build in my heart and in my life, that I was resentful that they weren't just doing it or doing it the way that I hoped or wanted. So it's been a process of me finding my voice and beginning to use my voice and say, and then allow things to be done, not perfect,
right.
In ways that, if I leave and my husband does dinner, it's okay if it's just ramen noodles, and not what I would have put, whatever. So, but that's been growth for me.
Yeah, that's pretty similar. So I was really happy to have found this work as I was onboarding into parenting, because I watched my 2 older sisters kind of parent, and we're similar in certain ways, and was able to kind of think ahead a little bit, which is the nice part of being the youngest. But I've had to, my husband and I think my husband's a 3, I can't remember his wings, or I think he's a social 3 maybe. My husband and I have had to talk a lot about what our values are when it comes to parenting. And I've had to really do internal work to recognize, he really values spontaneity and going on adventures. And I really value order and cleanliness in situations when his values might enjoy more sort of growth in that situation, trying to give him that sandbox and just say, this is his, and I'm just going to go into my room and not see it. He's got my daughter for a day, and that's sort of been our daughter. She's mine. But that's been his sandbox. Sort of that day, I am not there. I work. He's at home maybe with her, but the house is wild during the day. When I come out to get lunch, her playroom's wild. I don't know what they eat, but I've had to really say, that's his sandbox and it's his day with our daughter, and he gets to do that how he wants. But it's just having the conversation, I think, on the onset to recognize, sorry, I'm going on tangents, but the big thing has been, as Cindy mentioned, I think Allison as well, is to mention that this work is happening, because it's so hard when you're trying so hard to grow and not be like so instinctual when someone returns something that says, you're not trying hard enough. Why are you still doing this in a way that I can't receive it? It's so gutting. So having the conversation of like, me even allowing you to put a blue sock in a red sock is tearing my soul. Let's talk about that. Just that recognition, because it can be really hard for other people of other types to realize how hard it is to let go of that control. Sorry, that was longer than I thought.
No, it's great. And it's a good reminder that control for a 1 isn't for the sake of control, it's for security. It's how I've learned to be safe in the world, is by controlling the outcome. Because if I control the outcome, I also then control, hopefully, the reduced conflict, the reduced criticism, the reduced heat I might get for the way that I am in the world, right? So it's a security response. And yes, that's what one of my favorite things about the Enneagram is sort of allows us to speak to somebody else's listening, right? So when I'm in relationship with a 1, I can sort of hold the gentleness around that rigidity or that control or that desire to have things a certain way, or for how I feel this in myself, is because it makes me feel safer. And there's a whole lot of kindness that comes. There's a ton of empathy that we can offer when it's like, okay, what is it about you that means this is my life, right? I can sort of really relate to that, Anna, is when I walk out of my office and my husband's in charge and there's stuff everywhere and I just feel triggered. I feel like life is not okay when my house is sort of chaotic, because a settled house is a settled Aaron. And it's been, that work of helping me down regulate my nervous system. So control is the way that the type 1 manages their anger. And when I sort of over control and I create this desire for goodness, perfectionism, improvement, however you want to describe it for yourself, and then I sort of tamper down anger, it leaks. It leaks as judgment. Why don't they just? It leaks as criticism of self or others. And it's a reminder in the context of people in relationship with 1, that when somebody is feeling criticized by a 1, it's remembering the internal criticism that had built in a 1 in order for it to leak out in the first place, right? So, okay, welcome to parenting. Hold on real fast. All right, we're back. Real life interruptions by my 4-year-old. So, but yeah, that's what we can sort of see is sort of the leaking of anger. So how does that show up for you when you can sort of see it leak in criticism or judgment or sort of the internal voice?
Well, I've been married 38 years. And so my husband and I don't fight much anymore. We've gotten to the point that, we don't sweat the small things. But every now and then when I will lash out, it's just like I apologize right away, but it's just like, where did that come from? And that's when I know that, and reflecting back on my day, that day, it was a horrible day, but trying to make it not horrible and try to make it work out. And then that's when I know it's just like, okay, where did this come from?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that has been a big in relationships, having sort of containing so much of what, like the little stuff, because you sort of are aware that people aren't quite as perfection oriented or as you are in some cases. So you don't say something sometimes because you're like, well, and then when it eventually comes out, it's tricky. My husband has started recently, when we still fight, we've only been married 5 years, but recently has been, and I don't know where this came from. I was just recognizing like, wow, what a spiritual moment, but asking me where my anger started. And that's really helped in our post-argument discussions, me think through like, oh, what was the first moment when I would have said something if I wasn't, so focused on just pressing through? What was the initial moment? And usually it's like, I don't know, I didn't actually really like breakfast and that didn't make me happy. It's not an anger moment. It's just like a criticism or a preference that I withheld. And then sort of it built up throughout the day. And that's been a really helpful thing to look through.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I would say, I think when things in my work life aren't going as perfectly and I can't control something, or I can't get the project done the way that I want it to be done in a timely manner. And sometimes that's totally out of my control because somebody else's responsibility couldn't get me the information I needed. I definitely see that it comes out as I lash out at my kids and I try to control at home then. And I would say then relationally with my spouse, I'm really working at more pauses, building in pauses, where I used to have outbursts. I'm trying to pause and gain more clarity and slow everything down before, so that then my words are more clear, and not just filled with the anger.
Sure. That's awesome. So this may or may not be a hard question. But what would you say is one of or your greatest gift for the folks who constantly want to be better?
That's a really hard question.
It's so hard.
I mean, it was even hard in the beginning when you talked to me after I shared in the opening. Like, it was my way of showing up in that interview. Like, I couldn't even take that in. So this is hard.
I think the wisdom paired with the fortitude to follow through is a beautiful combination, that like for myself goes undervalued of myself, and it's I think a gift that we bring to the world for sure.
I would say I'm incredibly loyal, and sometimes to a fault, but if you're on my team, you're on my team, and I might tell you what to do, but
Yeah, I would say that I'm incredibly ethical. That has rang true with me as we've talked today, about, and as part of the one. And probably one of my gifts is able to see clearly things and have the wisdom, like you just said, Anna, to bring change, and the ability to help bring change.
Nice. So what would you want someone to know? Spouse, family, friends, coworkers? What would you want them to know about how or why patterns of your type show up?
I think I would want them to know that it comes from a good place, It comes from a heart to want to see change happen for the good, and that I'm not being harsh, critical, bitchy. And that it's really hard to be me because the inner critic is exhausting.
Yeah.
I think I would like kind of want them to see, I don't know if you all have seen that Inside Out movie, but I sort of would want a replay of my brain in that Inside Out movie, for them to really hear, as Allison said, the inner critic. It's loud. So that's what I would want, just some awareness of.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I think, Allison, you kind of spoke with what I would want, and just for them to understand it is hard to be me. And I know it's hard for them to be them.
Yeah.
But, and so to understand each other and to, understand that even though I'm coming off this way, I'm really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So what are ways that you resource yourself? How do you give yourself grace, or how do you let go or find that sort of peace or serenity? Like, what are ways you take care of yourself that you found that are really effective for you?
This is going to sound counterintuitive, but I try to do things that feel challenging, but are actually kind of relaxing. So this morning, I took my daughter to a cafe just to do like a mom and daughter breakfast, and I didn't pack a bib, I didn't pack snacks. I was like, we're just going. And that is not something I instinctively do. But I was like, I want to try this and see how it goes. And we went, it was fine. And I came home and it was good. We had a great time. And just collecting that data point of knowing, oh, I can operate differently was so relaxing for my day, to just know that there's like, to feel the truth of that there's growth available.
It's beautiful.
I'm going to piggyback off of that. I think that I'm trying to bring more spontaneity, because I like order and plans and detailed plans versus just like, let's just go today on a hike. And so trying to bring that more into my life. And then I'm working at trying to be really way more aware of the present moment, because I've noticed that my brain is constantly trying to solve the problems or see things and fix things. And I'm working at awareness practices, like washing the dishes and I feel the water right now, like simple mindfulness practices to help me be more grounded and in the moment.
Nice. That's beautiful.
Good. Yeah, I think maybe it's a trait of the ones. None of us are spontaneous. So, who likes a surprise birthday party?
No, this is so good. This is so good for my soul to hear you ladies. Oh, because I'm not alone then in this.
No, I felt so bad one time. My husband took me on a surprise weekend trip and packed for me. It's like, oh no. And so I worked really hard that weekend to be nice. But I think that is a good practice of telling myself that it's okay that I don't have the bib or whatever. I'm beyond that. But even preparing for this, I pulled up the email and I called my daughter and I said, okay, I need more resources. I have to prepare for this because I need to know exactly what I'm talking about. She goes, Mom, take a breath. I go, you're right. So I didn't over prepare. I just came into this, but that's growth for me. So it's,
yeah.
But I have to do that, knowing, what's the word, intentionally.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to do that more.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of funny, something I was reflecting on is all the things we've stated, we're like doing things, sort of the active doing things, which is kind of funny. But when I want to like literally do a hobby or relax or something that's not involving improvement of self, I try to find something that has limited instructions that I can do well, but space for creativity. So something I started doing was crocheting, where it's like, it's a pattern. There's a 1, 2, 3, 4 that I have to repeat over and over. But one stitch could be off, it could go different colors. And that's kind of been a nice tool for allowing the instinct to happen, but creating space for whatever life in a yarn, however much can go there.
That's a beautiful analogy for it. It's just, how do we blow a little more room around it, right? So it's got a little more padding, it's got a little more space. And that's all of our work, right? Regardless of where we sit on the Enneagram, that's all of our work, is to figure out how we make room for a little bit more. And the way that the 1 orients on the Enneagram, it sort of reaches for the 7 and it reaches for the 4 as a way to balance out, right? The 7 in spontaneity, the 4 in sort of like creativity, but also the sort of beauty of all things, right? So to hear you, Allison, talking about like a grounding work of washing my hands and just being in the moment of washing my hands, that beautiful aspect of 4 to presence, right? Just as much as the spontaneity. And when we think about centering all 3, we really get this whole, well-rounded, accessed sense of self. If I live in any one of those tendencies solely, right, it's too much of a good thing. But sort of this balance of all is where we sort of live into our gifts. And I think that's what's beautiful, is that while somebody who orients in type 1 or fixates in type 1 might feel that they haven't yet arrived, the gifts of the 1 are so necessary in the world to give us a container to understand what is good, what is ethical, what is right? And sort of this internal rightness, like this true sort of measure of integrity is often what 1 can bring to, whether it's like I'm trying to embody the 1, or I have 1 on team, or 1 in relationship. And so I think for folks who are witnessing the 1, the work for the rest of us is to remember to orient to 1 with tenderness, right? We sort of live in the world where we kind of go defense first, right? So someone might come at me with some directness, and it might be my instinct to sort of fight or put up my dukes or to be defensive. And that doesn't allow for enough room to understand why a 1 might orient in the world in that sort of stringent, rigid way of being. And it comes out of control, which comes from a desire to be secure and safe. And so when I can orient tenderness, and this is my ask of everyone else in the world who is not a 1, is to remember that when you see a 1 being hard on themselves or hard on another, it's because they have filled up their critical self buckets so much. And so when I orient with tenderness, I remind a type 1 that they have a safe place to land, that it's okay to have made a mistake. It is okay to have not had it all figured out, right? And that in turn leaves some room for some grace and some healing, and in turn some spontaneity or some reflection of my own goodness. So I really appreciate the 3 of you sharing those perspectives, sharing how hard you can be on yourselves, and how much you want folks to remember that you're coming from a really good place, because that's the truth of the 1. They are really good people with really kind hearts that are trying hard to feel safe in the world in the way they know how. So I know I feel really supported in the 1 that's in me. I can see that sort of happening with each other. So I can only imagine the gift you're going to give to other people. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Erin, for this invitation. And also, can you tell my husband with the tenderness piece? Like that's spot on.
Absolutely.